Welcome to Catholic Publishing 101, a podcast of the Association of Catholic Publishers, better known as the ACP. Our goal is to give Catholic authors and editors insights into the challenges and obstacles in publishing Catholic content. I'm your host, Therese Brown, the Executive Director of the ACP, and today we have a special guest joining us to help us better understand how to find and select an editor. Please welcome Anjanette Barr, a literary agent with Dunham Literary. She represents authors in both the religious and general market, and she lives in beautiful Juneau, Alaska, with her family of 6. Anjanette, it's great to have you on the show again.
Hi. Yes, absolutely.
So let's dig into this topic. We often hear that every author needs a good editor, but in reality, every author may need different kinds of editors. So, could you walk
hmm
us through the different kinds of editors, what they do, and why, as an author, I might need to find one or another of them?
Yeah, I think this is a huge stumbling point for people because they go in not early, in their career, and new writers go in not even knowing what that really means, and they're maybe focused on what they knew in school, which is someone who corrects your grammar, and that's certainly true. But there's so many different types of editors. It's really helpful to lay out what we mean when we say that, and it's helpful to ask the person who's recommending an editor for you what they mean,
Mm-hmm.
because there are several different types of editors. Um, in publishing, because I'm a literary agent, so I'm regularly working with editors. In publishing, when we say an editor, the first thing we're thinking of is the primary shepherd of a project at a publishing house. So that's kind of editor with a capital E, is what I like to say. That's their official job title within their publishing company. And those editors are usually paid by the publisher. They're not someone you can just hire to work on your own work. But those are the kind of editors that we're looking for to sell a book to. So, an agent or an author approaching a publishing house will probably be talking to an editor who's deciding if they have the vision for the book, can help the book get to where it needs to be published. And that editor actually walks that project all the way through from the beginning kind of edits, line edits, which we'll talk about, to the end where they hand it over to the marketing team and everyone gets it on the shelves. So that editor, when we say you should find an editor, is not usually the editor that we're talking about, but that can be really confusing for authors. So when we talk about hiring an editor, that's usually someone who works on a freelance basis, and they're not necessarily loyal to one publisher. They work with maybe publishers, but often just authors individually. And that editor is someone who possesses those skills of correcting grammar, syntax, punctuation, but also sometimes other things. So, kind of going from big picture down to little, one type of editor is called a developmental editor. And that type of editor looks at the whole manuscript, nonfiction or fiction, the structure of it, if it makes sense, does the concept work? And they're like your ideas person. You can hire a developmental editor at any stage to read through your work and say, I really like this, but the pacing is not great. Or you should think about maybe this character, if it's fiction, needs a little bit more development. And so they can really be kind of a coach, but they're not messing with the little nitty gritty, grammar and spelling. But that's one type of editor. And you may need that type of editor. You may need that type of editor before you can move on to the next type, which is a line editor, or sometimes they call themselves copy editors. That's more nonfiction usually, but you could hear it called both. Or you hear other things too. They may say they offer a comprehensive edit. It just means they're looking at the book in its final form, as good as you can get it. So hopefully you've already dealt with the developmental structure stuff, and they're helping you make more sense to your reader. So they're looking at, paragraph breaks maybe would be the biggest thing they're looking at, and then breaking down even smaller, word choice. And do you use way too many commas? Most of us do, that sort of thing. And they're really invaluable because the more mistakes like those, or even just choices that could be clearer when you write, the more distracted your readers get. So you never want to skip that. But we can maybe talk later about how much you should pay for that, or if you even have to pay for that. Let's say you're really good at that. Do I really need that kind of an editor? We can talk about that. And then the proofreader, after that person has done everything they need to do, you've accepted what they've suggested that you change and you feel like it's looking really good, you still often would want a proofreader to come in and make sure that all your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed, make sure that you didn't accidentally use an alternative spelling of a homophone. So the there and there and two, because our eyes can skim over those, and it doesn't mean you're bad at grammar. It means that you have, however many thousands of words on the page, and it's easy to miss dropped letters and things like that. So that proofreader is kind of the last stop for most edits. And so you want to make sure, for instance, that you're not hiring a proofreader if what you really need is a developmental editor or a line editor.
That makes a lot of sense. You touched on one type of editor that I've heard a term a lot in religious publishing. I don't know if it's as well used in secular publishing, but that's an acquisitions editor. Can you say a little bit about
Yes.
what that person is? Because that's a pretty specific job, as I understand it.
Yeah. So an acquisitions editor is that editor with a capital E. Um, there are instances where the editor that acquires your book, which is another way to say they buy it for the publisher, right? Is not the same person who will then do all the rest of the work for you. So there are instances where the reason that they have that very specific title, acquisitions editor, is kind of like they're a scout for the publisher. And they may take on some projects where they do all the editing, but they may also just be kind of a vision person. And they're looking for, oh, I know that we are looking for these type of books. I'm going to hunt for them and acquire them. So let's say you have a meeting at a Catholic Publishing Conference or something like that. It may be with an acquisitions editor. And that could end up being, if they acquire your book, the editor that shepherds your project the whole way through. It could also be that they partner with another editor who you also will work really closely with, and they will do all the other, the work for you, and kind of you'll have two editors at that house. But when you look on Publishers Marketplace, which is a very standard resource for trade publishing outside of the religious market, and the religious market uses it some too, you'll be able to look up a profile of an editor, and they often have titles like acquisitions editor, associate editor, editorial director. There's a lot of kind of different titles that denote either hierarchy within the company or what their kind of narrow focus is. But all of those fall into that category I call editors with a capital E, that you don't hire individually to work on your
Great,
book.
thanks. So
Mhm.
now that we get a sense of kind of the delineation between these different types of editors, how do you determine which kind of editor you need, or as you said, are ready for next?
Yeah. So some of this comes down to your career goals. Um, if you were not planning on pursuing traditional publishing, you'll never deal with that editor with a capital E, that person at the publishing house that you have to impress with your work and convince them to invest in you. But you will still need an editor, and that's where freelance editors come in. But even if you plan on going traditional publishing rather than self-publishing, you may still end up hiring those editors. But before going to how to decide, it's really important to note that you don't pay those editors with a capital E at the publishing house. So it's really important to know that if you know that you're going to be going that route, you may be able to get away with less editing on the front end that you invest in yourself. But so first question to ask yourself is, what are my career goals? Is this something I'm publishing for posterity? It doesn't matter if it's perfect, it's pretty good already. Or is this something that I know will eventually be in the hands of an editor at a publishing house, and so I just really have to get it as good as I can, but they've got me, if it's good enough. Um, so that's questions that you ask yourself, and then you have to ask yourself, do I have the skill set to bypass some of these? So maybe you work as a proofreader, so you're not really worried about that final bit. You know that you can tidy it up pretty well, but you have trouble with the big ideas, and you may need someone to come in and read the first iteration and tell you what's not working. Or maybe you're the opposite. A lot of people are the opposite. They can kind of put the pieces together, but then all the little details are harder to focus on because they're an ideas person. Um, so thinking through those questions of really honestly with yourself, what do I really want and what am I actually good at is can really help you go a long way with determining. And then, asking other people, getting their advice and paying attention to them, um, who have had eyes on your book. And maybe some of those people will have those skill sets and they may volunteer. If you edit mine, I'll edit yours,
Mm-hmm.
and you can kind of barter those things you're good at. If you're real honest with yourself and you build community with other writers, you may not end up having to pay for every single type of edit, even if you end up using those edits.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like too there you need to have some humility as an author to
Yeah,
know that this is what I can do, this is what I can't do, and the can't
yeah,
do stuff I need to go find somebody who's better at it than
yeah.
I am, so that so that what it actually publishes is readable and people
Hmm.
find it useful. I've read far too many books that clearly did not have a proofreader because there's
Yeah,
words missing or uh, autocorrect.
yeah. I feel
Things
like
happen.
the humility bit can be softened because it's always difficult for us to humble ourselves. That's like a human
Mm-hmm.
condition, right? Um, if you really think about service to others. So if you really think about the end reader and recognizing that it is distracting for them, it is a waste of their time and money, and they may not get the message you're trying to give them
Mm-hmm.
if there are these problems, then you can kind of step back and say, I do have worth, I am good at this, but I also am one person. I can't be good at everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the end user deserves to have a quality manuscript. And so then you can kind of push that out for the sake of others.
That makes a lot of sense. So that now we know we need an editor. Question comes up now: how do you find them? I'm sure you can find a lot of editors online. I've seen names like on LinkedIn, that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But how do you know where to go and which editors to trust?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the truth is anyone can call themselves an editor.
Yeah.
So, you definitely don't want to invest money into something that won't be helpful. I mean, that's disappointing when that happens. And of course, editors have varying levels of talent, and that could correspond with their price. And so you're going to be doing a little bit of shopping around.
Hmm.
But I would say there's a few kind of good metrics to use, and the first one is always who's been recommended to you by someone who's actually used their services. So word of mouth is always still the very best if you have a community of writers, because then you can trust them to not do a poor job, especially if you've read that person's work and you saw
Hmm.
the results and you realize that it doesn't have those glaring mistakes. Then you can go in with a little bit of confidence, and that those people actually delivered on their services, so the author who recommended them did not get scammed,
Hmm.
basically, right?
Hmm.
So word of mouth is always really important. If you're a member of something like the Catholic Writers Guild, where there's a
Hmm.
lot of authors kind of in that beginning stage, another great Catholic organization that's not ACP, that's more just writers, is Legend Fiction. If you're a member of communities like that, they'll be telling you who they use, or you can ask, who did you use? And they can give you those recommendations. Um, the next best thing, if you can't find someone that meets your needs just by word of mouth, is to lean on professional organizations like the ACP, for anyone they recommend. If there's someone that, because you can tell me, but I know that some editors at publishing houses in the Catholic community, but just in the religious community in general, also do freelance.
Yep.
So that's always something that is a possibility you may find there, um, because they're supplementing their income. That's a whole nother podcast episode, but uh, um, another really good resource is the Editorial Freelancers Association, or the EFA. So you don't have to be a member of the EFA to call yourself an editor, but a lot of people use the EFA as kind of a credential. They pay their dues and they participate in the EFA, and they have a lot of really good resources on their website, plus a directory. Um, but one thing that you do want to always vet, besides will they do the work, will they scam me,
Hmm.
are they worth the money, is, do they regularly edit what you write? So Catholic writers, it does make a difference if the person is familiar with what Catholic readers want. So there, in some cases, if you're writing something nonfiction and Catholic, you may end up having to seek out a separate editor to fact check or
Mm-hmm.
to look and kind of double check your theology. Are you and someone like a priest or a deacon could be great for this, and it may not even be someone you pay or someone who regularly does this. So they would still have that kind of editor role,
That's a good point.
but
Yeah.
they would not necessarily be doing the grammar, right? There, you may need different things. But if you are using someone just for grammar and syntax, there's still things that if they only ever edit fiction and your book is nonfiction, they may not be the best choice for you because they just won't have a good feel for the flow and the normal structure of the type of book that you write. So always kind of thinking through. It's not just are they good and are they a scam, but do they have the skill set that I need? And it's okay if they don't. I mean, you're not insulting them by not using them. They would be frustrated, having to edit this book that they're not super comfortable with the style and format. And then, looking for red flags would, in this situation, would be important if you weren't finding them through one of these professional places or word of mouth. Things like they don't have any kind of presence that is traceable. They have
Mm.
rates that seem really different from everyone else's rates. The Editorial Freelancers Association has a rates table, so you can kind of see where they fit in with what everyone else is charging. They have, you know, strange communication styles. They require you to call them first, or they require you to mail your manuscript, kind of anything that's outside the norm. Um, Pay attention to. If your gut says I don't know about this, then you do some extra legwork and find out if you can maybe um, get a reference.
Mm-hmm.
Can they tell you who they've worked with so that you can chat with them?
That's a
So
great point. Yeah,
yeah.
I've in talking to some editors that I know in the Catholic publishing field. Oftentimes, the right editor is somewhat like buying a house or a marriage. You need to find
Yeah.
somebody that fits who
Yeah.
you are and what you're writing to, and not every editor is going to fit every author,
No.
even with the
it,
same qualifications and
yeah.
background and experience.
Yeah, even someone with a very wide experience and qualifications could end up being the wrong fit for you.
Yeah.
So, while someone who has a wide, varied kind of experience is a better bet than if you feel you may be kind of niche or an unusual case, it's often worth it to not go with the first person you find, but find someone who seems like a really good fit.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you mentioned that EFA has a rate table that varies. It's a really good resource. So let's talk about that question of what once you decide, how do you know what to pay for their services? I've heard a lot of things over the years: page rates, word rates, flat
Mm-hmm.
rate. Just a lot of different things. I think it's probably really confusing, especially for newer authors, what to
Yeah,
expect.
yeah. Yeah, I love that rate table that the EFA puts out because even if someone is charging above or below, it helps you figure out how far from industry standard they
Mhm.
are and whether or not you're comfortable with that. They may have reasons for charging above or below. I've done lots of editing, and when I was doing freelance editing, I charged significantly lower at the beginning of my career than I did later because I wanted to get that roster of clients, and I did some for free, I did some for very cheap, and that's pretty normal for a beginner. And the beginner doesn't necessarily mean that they're not as good, they're certainly not as experienced. They may have a natural talent or have done a lot of this, but just not as a freelance editor before, so they're trying to build up their portfolio.
Mhm.
Um, but sometimes outliers could be because they're a little bit less experienced or they're very, very experienced. But for the most part, people should kind of, their rates should be in this window. Um, and I do most, well, there are different ways that people rate their services depending on the type of editing. So now that we've
Mhm.
kind of laid out the different types, um, let's say that developmental edit that you're getting is not going to have a lot of comments. It's more like a critique, and they're just going to put it all on one page, and it's just going to be a very brief overview. That may be quite affordable. They may charge you $100 for your whole book. Um, and really, all you're getting is just like a short conversation about the pros and the cons, positives and negatives. And that could be a really good place to start if you don't have a lot of money, because then at least you're not investing a lot in something that doesn't have as much promise as you thought it did. Um, But a full developmental edit that gets really into detail, so this would be a good time to make sure you know what they'll offer you, and they have to have that articulated. Are they giving you this one page or one paragraph critique, or are they going through the whole manuscript and making comments?
Mm-hmm.
Those could be two very different rates. A very in-depth developmental edit where they're really working with you almost like a book coach, or like a, just like holding your hand, could be quite a lot more. So that often has a per book rate, whereas a line edit is most likely going to be per word.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not going to charge as much for a 40,000 page book, the 40,000 word book, as they are going to, charge for a 500,000 word, commentary on the Gospels or
Right.
something. It's going to
Right.
be a lot different, because they're not necessarily going to charge you hourly. It doesn't always make sense to charge someone
Mm-hmm.
hourly as an editor. People are faster or slower, and that doesn't necessarily reflect on their service that they're giving you. But per word is a pretty standard, easy metric for them. So
Mm-hmm.
that rate table for line editing will include how much they charge per word.
That makes a lot of sense.
So that's a good way to look, but at that, and then occasionally you'll get an hourly rate, um, and you'll just want to find out how they track that. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's much less common for an hourly rate for editing, but often that's someone like an editor you put on retainer. Let's say you have a Catholic magazine you're starting up, or you run a website, and so they may get through quite a few articles in an hour, or they may have one that's particularly tough, and so they may want to be charged hourly. But usually for a book, you'll find per word.
That makes a lot of sense. I think you mentioned to me once that there are some services that editors will provide for free. What might
Yeah.
those be like?
Yeah. So editors at publishing houses get paid by the publisher. So that would be a good example of someone who's not going to charge you as the author to edit their work. So the publisher gets paid when your book
Hmm.
sells. And so they're investing in you up front. And that editor essentially is investing in you up front too, but being paid by the publisher. So editors are usually salaried. They make a certain amount per year, no matter how many books they're working on. Occasionally, an editor at a publishing house will be a contract editor, and then they may work on commission. So, in other words, your book has to sell for them to earn money. But what you won't see in traditional publishing is an editor saying, "We'll take your book on, but you have to pay us $500 to edit it."
So that would be a red flag if you were talking to somebody about
Yeah,
editing your book and they said that
yeah,
you might want to say, wait a minute, and then go
yeah.
talk to somebody else. Yeah.
Yes, it would mean that they are not a traditional publisher. There are other types of publishers.
Hmm.
So there are hybrid publishers. There are also self publishing services. So they may do the whole package for you. So it looks a lot like traditional publishing in that all of the little things that need to happen to make a book come to print happen. They have someone in house who does the editing, the design, the layout, the cover. Um, and then you can buy a package and
Hmm.
they will do it for you. But that's not traditional publishing.
Right.
And we've talked about this a little bit before, and you've had other episodes about this too. Traditional publishing, the thing that makes it traditional is that they are investing in you. There's nothing upfront for you. You get paid or not when the book sells or doesn't. And they're taking on that financial risk. So if they charge for editing, then they are something else other than traditional. And hybrid publishers, um, rather than that self-publishing service package, will have some combination of the two. They may charge um, what they consider a smaller fee of $2,000 to $5,000 for the whole package. But then once you've recouped that money, they'll start paying you like
Hmm.
traditional publishers do. And so, in that kind of gray area, that's a big, um, those are at least yellow flags, right? They're at least like, I've got to find out if I know what I'm getting into, because it can end up being quite a financial investment with no promise of return.
That makes a lot of sense. Any final thoughts that come to mind as we're talking here
Yeah.
that you want to add for our folks?
Yeah. Can you still hear me? You cut out for a minute, but if you
I
can,
can. Go
good.
ahead.
We can
Yeah,
always.
go right ahead.
Great. I would say my final thoughts are um, circling back to that humility piece, that all of us can be good at a lot of things, but we're not all good at everything. And that even if you're quite good, so let's say you are an editor and you do this, as a side job or even your primary job, you can see things in one way. You see things the way you see things, and bringing in perspective is just part of being part of the body of Christ. That we all have different talents and different perspectives that we bring in, and it's good to use your team. It's also understandable to feel like you can't afford a team, but don't let that discourage you. If you recognize the need for editing, just be creative and pray about it, and something's gonna, surprise you to come your way to make this all work. Whether it's help paying for it or a friend who can barter, or there are lots of people in your situation, whatever your situation is. So find that support, and do your due diligence, and don't put work out there that needs editing. There's always more edits that can be done. At the end of the
Mhm.
day, all of us who write, edit, find that ourselves at the crossroad where we can continue hammering away at this, or we can call it good enough. And so,
Yep.
at some point, you have to call it good enough. But be realistic with yourself about if you're there yet, or if you're out of fear, or or pride, not letting yourself get the help you need, and go ahead and get that help.
It sounds like one of the things you mentioned a couple times is connecting yourself to a community of authors, editors, like you mentioned, the Catholic Writers Guild, any of those kinds of
Mm-hmm.
groups. That's a natural outlet for support, and you can just extend the request. I had this need, and there are going to be people around you who are going to either have had that need, so they know what to
Yep.
do. They have options for you, like you said, those recommendations, or they have the skills and they're happy to share them with you and negotiate a relationship for doing
Yes,
that.
absolutely.
Very
Yeah.
important. Okay, well, thank you, Anjanette,
Yeah.
for sharing your expertise with us today again.
Yes.
Before we close today, to you, our listeners, if you are an author, we invite you to join the Association of Catholic Publishers as a content creator member to network with other Catholic publishing professionals. You can do that by going to CatholicPublishers.org and click on members, then join now. We are here to help guide you in your journey of Catholic publishing. So watch more episodes in this series or explore other series here at CatholicPublishers.org and on YouTube. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to Catholic Publishing 101 and leaving us a comment. Speaking of comments, we'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions for future episodes, so feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, X, LinkedIn, and YouTube, or at our website at CatholicPublishers.org. And thank you to our listeners and viewers for tuning in to today's episode. Thank you again to our guest, Anjanette Barr, for sharing her insights and expertise today. Until next time, keep spreading the gospel in everything you do, say, and write.